Episode 2C, Mormonism's Hidden Enforcers, Rockwell and Hickman. What if I told you that two of the most feared men in early Mormon history weren't just bodyguards? They were killers, operating under the direct command of church leadership, men whose names were whispered in fear, whose actions left blood on the frontier, and whose stories were conveniently sanitized by history. Today, we're diving into the lives of Porter Rockwell and William Bill Hickman. These were men who enforced faith with bullets and fear. And yes, they did things that would make most people recoil. But in Utah's early days, devotion and violence were often inseparable. Part 1. Porter Rockwell, the Destroying Angel. Orrin Porter Rockwell was born on June 25, 1813, in Belchertown, Hampshire County, Massachusetts, to Orrin and Sarah Witt Rockwell. His father, originally from Tolland, Connecticut, settled in Belchertown by 1809 and married Sarah Witt, who was born there. Both were influenced by the fervor of the Second Great Awakening. Around 1817, when Rockwell was about 4, the family moved to western New York's burned-over district, settling in Manchester and Palmyra. They became neighbors of the Smith family, who had recently arrived from Vermont. It was there, in that charged religious climate, that Rockwell's path first crossed with Joseph Smith, Jr. While Smith was recovering from leg surgery, the two boys formed a bond that would evolve into a lifelong friendship, one that lasted until Smith's death in 1844. Family lore later suggested a deeper connection. Rockwell was said to be related to Joseph Smith through a jumble of ancestral lines via his paternal grandmother, Irene Porter, who descended from John Porter and Ann White, progenitors of the Mormon prophet. However, there is no independently verified evidence proving that Orrin Porter Rockwell was a blood relative of Joseph Smith, Jr. through that line. As the young faith began to take shape, Rockwell quickly aligned himself with it. In 1830, at 16, he was baptized into Smith's Church of Christ in Fayette, New York. Tradition places his baptism on April 6th, the day the church was organized, but surviving records suggest June 9th as more likely. Rockwell was the youngest among the first group of converts. On February 2, 1832, he married Luana Beebe in Jackson County, Missouri, and later received his temple endowment in Nauvoo on January 5, 1846. As Joseph Smith's influence grew, so too did Rockwell's reputation. He became mythologized as the prophet's loyal protector, but the reality was darker. By 1844, Rockwell was in Nauvoo, armed and ready to defend the prophet. Contemporary accounts describe him as dangerous, fearless, and willing to kill if necessary. That reputation only deepened amid growing conflict between the Mormons and their Missouri adversaries. Some historians even link Rockwell to raids carried out during that turbulent period, and to the attempted assassination of Governor Lilburn Boggs. On May 6, 1842, Boggs was shot by an unknown assailant who fired through a window as he read a newspaper in his study. Badly wounded but surviving, Boggs was the former Missouri governor who had signed Executive Order 4 on October 27, 1838, the extermination order calling for the violent expulsion of Mormons from the state. The Sangamo Journal later published a letter by John C. Bennett, a recently excommunicated Mormon who had been mayor of Nauvoo, Major General of the Nauvoo Legion, and Chancellor of the University of Nauvoo. Bennett implicated Rockwell in the shooting, writing, "In 1841, Joe Smith predicted or prophesied in a public congregation in Nauvoo that Lilburn W. Boggs, ex-governor of Missouri, should die by violent hands within 1 year. From 1 or 2 months prior to the attempted assassination of Governor Boggs, Mr. O.P. Rockwell left Nauvoo for parts unknown to the citizens at large. I was then on terms of close intimacy with Joe Smith, and asked him where Rockwell had gone. 'Gone,' said he, 'gone to fulfill prophecy.' Rockwell returned to Nauvoo the day before the report of the assassination reached there." Smith and his followers vehemently denied Bennett's claim, but the accusation stuck, and Rockwell's name became inseparable from the Boggs affair. Months later, Rockwell was apprehended in St. Louis on March 6, 1843, and held in Independence, Missouri. He briefly escaped jail in late May but was recaptured soon after. The Western Expositor reported on September 30, 1843, Orrin Porter Rockwell, the Mormon confined in our county jail some time since for the attempted assassination of ex-Governor Boggs, was indicted by our last grand jury for escaping from the county jail some weeks since and sent to Clay County for trial. Owing, however, to some informality in the proceedings, he was remanded to this county again for trial. There was not sufficient proof adduced against him to justify an indictment for shooting ex-Governor Boggs, and the grand jury, therefore, did not indict him for that offense. Although never indicted for the shooting, Rockwell was convicted of jailbreak and released on December 13, 1843, 10 months after his arrest. In the years that followed, the Mormon migration west opened a new chapter in Rockwell's life. Following the settlers to the Salt Lake Valley, he became Brigham Young's personal enforcer. Those who opposed Young, questioned church authority, or challenged territorial control often found Rockwell standing in their path. His nickname, the Destroying Angel, was no exaggeration. It inspired real fear. That fear was not without foundation. On September 16, 1845, Lieutenant Frank Worrell of the Carthage militia was shot and killed by Rockwell after refusing to stop when ordered by non-Mormon Sheriff William Backenstoss. Worrell had been the sergeant of the guard at Carthage jail when Joseph and Hiram Smith were murdered. By 1849, Rockwell's reputation had shifted from outlaw to lawman. He was appointed deputy marshal of Great Salt Lake City, a position he held until his death. Even in this official capacity, he remained known for his endurance, loyalty, and relentless pursuit of those who crossed him. Yet his violent tendencies never fully faded. On April 21, 1851, General Daniel H. Wells sent a posse led by Rockwell to recover horses taken by a group of go-shoot near Benson Grist Mill. Losing the trail, they encountered about 30 Ute instead, took them prisoner without disarming them, and chaos ensued when a prisoner tried to flee. A non-Mormon posse member, Custer, shot one captive and was immediately killed by another, who was then shot in return. Most prisoners escaped, but Rockwell ordered the execution of the remaining 4 or 5 on April 22nd. As the Utah Territory stabilized, Rockwell turned partly to business. He operated the Hot Springs Hotel and Brewery near Point of the Mountain at the southern end of the Salt Lake Valley. His frontier reputation drew the English explorer Richard Francis Burton, who visited in 1860. Burton, staying nearby with Lysander Dayton, was invited to dine with Rockwell. Over whiskey, Rockwell shared advice for surviving the journey to Sacramento. Keep a loaded double-barreled shotgun, camp in darkness far from where supper was cooked, trust no one, and beware of white Indians, white bandits disguised as Native Americans. Even so, Rockwell's violent legacy persisted. He was implicated in the 1857 Aiken Massacre, the murder of several Californian travelers under suspicious circumstances, a crime that, like others before it, was never formally proven but forever linked to his name. He died of natural causes in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, on June 9, 1878, and was buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. His epitaph reads, "He was brave and loyal to his faith, true to the prophet Joseph Smith. A promise made him by the prophet. Through obedience, it was fulfilled." At his funeral in the Salt Lake City 14th Ward Schoolhouse, Apostle Joseph F. Smith, nephew of Joseph Smith and future church president, declared, "They say he was a murderer. If he was the friend of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and he was faithful to them and to his covenants, and he has gone to heaven and apostates can go to hell." Porter Rockwell was yesterday afternoon ushered into heaven, clothed with immortality and eternal life, and crowned with all glory which belongs to a departed saint. He has his little faults, but Porter's life on earth, taken all together, was one worthy of example and reflected honor upon the church. Through all his trials, he never once forgot his obligations to his brethren and his God. Not everyone agreed. 2 days later, on June 11, 1878, the Salt Lake Tribune offered a starkly different verdict. Porter Rockwell is another of the long list of Mormon criminals whose deeds of treachery and blood have reddened the soil of Utah and who has paid no forfeit to offended law. Part 2, William Bill Hickman, the confessed killer. Then there's Bill Hickman, whose story is even more chilling because he admitted to the killings himself. Wild Bill Hickman was a vigilante and hitman for religious leader Brigham Young, notorious even in his own time for his escapades. He wrote a book, Brigham's Destroying Angel, being the life, confession, and startling disclosures of the notorious Bill Hickman, the Danite chief of Utah. Hickman was born in Warren County, Kentucky on April 16, 1815. While living in Missouri, Hickman encountered members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, traveling from Kirtland, Ohio to their new gathering place in Clay County, Missouri, and ultimately agreed to be baptized into the religion in 1838. Upon the killing of Joseph Smith in 1844, he and many other Mormons followed Brigham Young westward into Mexican territory. During this period, Hickman began to practice polygamy under the instruction of Brigham Young, marrying Sarah Elizabeth Luce as his second wife in January 1846. In the spring of 1848, Hickman moved to an encampment in Iowa called Council Bluffs, where he performed what he would later call "my first act of violence under the rule of Brigham Young," in tracking down and killing a Native American who had threatened Young. The Latter-day Saints traveled westward through Native territory, where Hickman claims to have committed several other murders against Native Americans he and his co-religionists happened across, before finally arriving in Salt Lake City in 1849, where he started a homestead 10 miles south of the city proper. Early the following year, in 1850, tensions in Utah Valley between Mormon colonists and the native Timpanogos people had been increasing. Ultimately, the murder of a native man led to the Timpanogos taking Mormon cattle as an informal weregild. In response to this insult, the Mormon militia was raised, and Hickman joined them in what would come to be known as the Provo River Massacre. During the course of violence, Hickman records killing the chief of the band, Old Elk, whose head he removed with his Bowie knife, and which he brought back to Fort Utah and hung from the walls. The massacre ultimately killed around 50 Timpanogos men, and the surviving women and children were taken and sold as slaves to church members. In 1852, the Mormon-controlled Utah legislature passed a law giving Mormons priority to operate ferries over the Green River, which heightened tensions with the mountain men associated with Fort Bridger, who had previously run the ferries. Rumors circulated that Jim Bridger was arming native groups in the region, and affidavits were drawn up alleging as much. In response, Hickman led a posse of 150 Mormon militia to Fort Bridger, where they killed a few mountain men and seized several hundred head of livestock and whiskey, though Jim Bridger himself was not present. By April 1854, fearing retaliation from mountain men or allied native bands, Brigham Young tasked Hickman with establishing a church-owned ferry at Green River. Upon arrival, Hickman discovered the area overcrowded with ferries and growing tensions between Mormon ferrymen and mountain men. Rather than attempting to assert control there, he established a successful trading post at Pacific Springs near South Pass, 26 miles east of Green River. That same year, Judge Appleby appointed Hickman sheriff, county prosecuting attorney, assessor, and collector at Fort Supply, 12 miles south of Fort Bridger. In August 1854, Hickman was elected to the Utah Territorial Legislature, representing the Green River area. On February 8, 1856, at Brigham Young's request, Hickman and Porter Rockwell carried mail from Independence, Missouri, to Salt Lake City. Rockwell handled the route from Fort Laramie to Salt Lake City, while Hickman carried mail from Independence to Fort Laramie. Hickman's portion took nearly 4 months to complete. In 1857, Hickman participated in the Aiken Massacre, personally killing Horace Buckland under Young's orders. Hickman also played a key role in the Utah War, torching Fort Bridger and destroying multiple Federal Army supply trains. Hickman's break with Brigham Young began during the Morrisite War in 1863, when he joined a petition, supported by many Utah non-Mormons, to secure a pardon for the sect's surviving prisoners. Later that year, he claimed Young ordered him to murder U.S. Army General Patrick Edward Connor, an order Hickman refused, saying, "It shan't be done. I will see to that myself." Hickman's work as a scout for the U.S. Army further alienated him from Young and the church. Following legal actions by the church-run probate court, Hickman spent time in jail, and upon release, discovered much of his property had been seized and that his plural wives were encouraged to leave him. Fearing for his life and hounded by armed men, Hickman left Utah and spent several years mining in California and Nevada. In 1868, while still in California, he was formally excommunicated by his Taylorsville bishop, and 9 of his 10 wives eventually left him. By September 1871, Hickman confessed under interrogation to murdering Richard Yates at Brigham Young's request, providing testimony to a grand jury while being held at Fort Douglas under military protection. During this time, he wrote his autobiography, later published by J.H. Beadle as Brigham's Destroying Angel. No charges were ever brought against Young, who died in 1877. Hickman, having struck a deal to testify against Young if a trial occurred, was never convicted of the crimes he confessed to. He ultimately left Utah and died in the Wind River Mountains of western Wyoming in August 1883. Part 3. Faith and Violence Intertwined. Rockwell and Hickman weren't outlaws, they were instruments of power. In Utah Territory, church and state were inseparable, and violence was an accepted tool of enforcement. Historian Will Bagley puts it bluntly, Rockwell and Hickman were tools of a faith that could command loyalty unto death and beyond. Their story strips away the myth of pious heroism. Devotion could be deadly, obedience was enforced at gunpoint, and loyalty came with a lethal price. Looking at them forces us to confront the darker side of the Mormon experiment. This was not just a persecuted religious movement. It was a machine of power, willing to sanction murder to maintain control. The sanitized legends of the Utah frontier hide the fear, the blood, and the coercion. Rockwell and Hickman remind us that the Utah experiment was raw, violent, and unflinchingly real. I hope you learned something new today. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and follow for more no-fluff ex-Mormon content that cuts through the faith-promoting fog. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.